Today there'll be a series of presentations. We'll be showing films of some of the projects that were undertaken as part of Gaining Ground, and also there'll be an opportunity for some Q&As. So I'll introduce you to the first of today's speakers, Arts Officer with Clare County Council for over 20 years, and the woman who instigated and designed the commissioning programme for Gaining Ground. I'll ask Siobhan Mulcahy to come up, please.
I hope that you will enjoy what we have commissioned. Certainly for us it has been wonderful to work with the calibre of artists that came through our commissioning process. It has been wonderful to work with communities that they have engaged throughout the commissioning process, and we would hope that we would be able to continue to do so in the future. So thank you.
So I suppose the objective of the programme overall was founded on the principle of enabling high quality arts commissioning within a rural context and with rural communities. And we wanted that to be both of benefit to the artists but also to the communities themselves, and that it would have potential to have a lasting legacy from the encounters of both groups. Because it was a large scale programme, the development of it took place and was planned to take over a number of years, and that was primarily because of the logistics of it and in managing the programme. So we split it into 4 sections, and we had Legacy, which was for North Clare, we had Reimagining the Rural for West Clare, Dancing Together in Shannon, and Reflections, which was to take place here today. So both Legacy and Reimagining the Rural, they had a very extensive area from which artists could propose to work with, and there was an overriding ethos that spanned the whole programme, but each of the elements were designed specifically for the area in mind. So for example, with Legacy, the Arts Office were very keen to recognise and to acknowledge the rural arts programme that had been developing in North Clare since 2006, and there'd been a lot of work and a lot of artists working in the area, and programmes such as Shifting Ground and Ground Up, and there was the continuing legacy of the Ground Up collective, artist collective. So that was very much taken on board. So while the commissioning of those programmes was slightly different from Gaining Ground, the legacy of it was important to the Arts Office because they wanted to make sure that this programme was built upon the quality of previous commissionings. But it was made clear at the time that it was a different programme, it wasn't a continuation. So we were looking at inviting artists to look at new ideas, new methodologies to bring the rural arts discourse into the fore, and to be talking possibly about adding conversations that were already taking place.
Why would a national monument be destroyed? That's a very big question. I suppose the first thing is it was in the way of the motorway, even though it would have been there first. The process of this happening comes because of the National Monuments Act, which was brought into law here in the 1930s. And I'll speak a little bit about that, but I just want you to understand that this is violence on the landscape. This is what these images show you. We're fortunate enough in one way to have the technology to understand that. So that's the leftovers of the ring fort, sliced in half, with a fence there. Michael and Eddie visited the site on several occasions and took a particular interest in the engineer's report and the archaeological survey work on the site. There's been an extraordinary amount of car accidents on that particular stretch of road since the motorway was built there. So Michael did a Freedom of Information Act, which is detailed in the book, and we received back information explaining that the reason for the amount of accidents that occur on that motorway is because of a microclimate that has developed there because of the creation of the motorway, which makes a lot of sleet and hail on that site, causing road accidents. Of course, the fairies did it, right? The fairies are living in the ring fort, That's our shorthand for us saying that there's some other sort of spiritual essence in the landscape enacting revenge upon the times of the modern era. Something Eddie would speak about a lot. But begin to unpack that and understand its loss of Indigenous knowledge, to know that nobody in that area is aware anymore that there's a load of sleet and hail, and it's a very difficult climate to do anything in. That's been lost, and as a result of that, there's loads of car accidents on the motorway that replaces that site.
Lex Nova, the floating flagstone. So this is a creative communities project supported by Creative Ireland. The project explores the amazingly rich history of Lixnaw. That's why it's lovely to follow one from Sean, because I wouldn't be one for maps, but I've actually found myself looking at maps a lot. And the project looks at Lixnaw, which had a palace. I don't know, do people know where Lixnaw is? Has anyone ever heard of it? Yeah. So it's only about 12 miles from our house, so it's across the Shannon in North Kerry. But it's amazing sometimes when people commission something that they open a world to all of us who didn't know this. Do you know that I wasn't aware of this incredible place? So Lixnaw had a palace, and there's links to Versailles. It has canals that were built in the 12th century, and I went to the museum and I saw the spades that they dug out the canals with. Can you imagine? Starting to dig a canal with spades. It's amazing. There are orchards, there's extensive orchards there. They were making their own cider, and there's this beautiful castle where they used to sit on top and drink their cider while watching different games and different things happening. There's a deer park, and there's so much more. But it's also in a very low-lying area. I was talking to someone there last week, and he said it's 9 inches below sea level, and it's very close to the sea. It's an area surrounded by beautiful bogs, as well as very rich arable land. And the project, I suppose, is questioning what we can learn from the past and this rich legacy of past as we go forward, specifically in terms of food, sustainability, biodiversity, and climate change. So this, in the photograph here, is, if you just go back to that slide, so we started filming one day in February because the rain was so torrential, and I thought, I wonder what's happening with Lixnaw and the bog. So this is the road into Lixnaw. And a friend of ours, actually, the day after, there was no sign on the road, and she actually ended up in the water. But that's actually the road, and that's the land. So you can see how flooded it's getting already. So we'll just go to the next slide. And then I suppose in terms of farming, I mean, we would see our land from maybe September, October. You couldn't get machinery into it, even though we're much higher than Lixnaw. But for farmers around Lixnaw, this is the reality. And for farmers around North Kerry, this is becoming increasingly reality, that this is a field, you know, that you have swans swimming in your fields. So when people, I suppose, interestingly enough, we're on our 4th Minister for Agriculture in a year. And maybe that reflects the bigger issue that's going on in terms of agriculture in Ireland. And I'm personally very concerned about the future of farming in Ireland. And I suppose communities, you know, when you drive to Lixnaw now, there's houses, and the water's coming up behind their houses. So it's been interesting. In some ways, I'm sorry I ever suggested we work on this project, because it's causing me anxiety and it's making me sad to see the level of flooding. But the fact that I've engaged in our process is forcing me to engage in the research and the work around this, and making me think, how do we discuss these difficult issues with communities? And I'd just like to share with you a few lines I received from a good friend yesterday, and it was written by Terry Tempest Williams. I didn't know Terry Tempest Williams until yesterday, but I thought, what a beautiful poem for today. So once upon a time, when women were birds, there was the simple understanding that to sing at dawn and to sing at dusk was to heal the world through joy. The birds still remember what we have forgotten, that the world is meant to be celebrated. And I had written a song, and this is a song I wrote during lockdown. I'm going to finish with this. And since singing has been effectively banned, I thought it would be a good chance to sing today, because I haven't had a chance to sing anywhere else. Is that all right? I wasn't breaking any rules. I'm far enough away from the audience. What? She says she won't try and stop me. But my dad had, just before the lockdown, the last time I saw him before lockdown, and he was leaving our house, he gave me a hug, and he said, this could be the last hug for a while. And I couldn't stop crying. I thought, I don't know when I'm going to see them again. We're only a couple of hours away, but we couldn't leave the county. And then just 2 or 3 weeks after that, a very good friend died, an activist, Shaida Janjua, who is who was a passionate advocate for anti-racism, for people in direct provision, and she was a poet and she was a feminist, and this song just came to me, so I'm just going to finish on this today, and this is a song for all of you, and I suppose just about being brave and being strong. This could be the last hug for a while. This could be the last hug for a while, the last time I see your roguish smile. So hold me tight, things will be alright, but this could be the last hug for a while. If we didn't love, well, this would never hurt, but love makes bonds that hurt when they are cut. And love makes us understand we're all connected to this land. Yet one day we need to fly away. Yes, this could be the last hug for a while, the last time I see your roguish smile. So hold me tight, things will be alright, but this could be the last hug for a while. And this is for all of you. Be brave, be strong, give voice to those who are wronged, and shine a light so others find their way. Be brave, be strong, give voice to those who are wronged, and shine a light so others find their way. So hold me tight, things will be alright, but this will be the last hug for a while. Yes, this will be the last hug for a while. So just to say thank you so much for listening, and do stay strong and do your best to do the right thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I said I couldn't stop you when you were singing, but I thought, I hope she can sing, and you can sing. That was beautiful. Thank you very much.
So, I was brought into the area to make work that would reflect the last 25 years and do something for the next 25 years. And what I quickly realised was that 16 to 18 of those last 25 years were civil strife, the Corp gas controversy. I'm not going to go into great detail in this now, but there's the Richard O'Donnell film The Pipe, where there's Lorna Segan's great book, Once Upon a Time in the West. I'm sure many of you remember this. You remember Gardaí and their behaviour up there, and this ran on for 16 of those 25 years that I had to make a work to kind of reflect on. And what I realised very quickly when you go up there is you can't speak of it, you know? So it's like, because the people are entirely fatigued and kind of traumatised by what happened, but also radically separated. And this being rural Ireland, it's got a very long and deep memory. So I was kind of in this quandary. Well, if you don't, you can't speak of it, but you must acknowledge it, because this happened. And if you don't acknowledge it, that's also a political choice. So not unlike today, I was like giving this presentation. I had a very interesting time up there because people locally would work with me informally but not formally, because I was funded by the local authority. They'd lost all trust and faith in the local authority. Also, they didn't know who I was, because here we go again, another person coming up, and they're going to pick at the scab of the gas. They're going to open this wound. So when I had to kind of present at the symposium, this was a kind of critical kind of moment. You know, I didn't show this slide. I showed another slide, because it was kind of like the local people whose trust I was trying to win. Many of the gatekeepers there, they came to the symposium, and there was this element of very interesting when he was talking about bog pine, and he was talking about the Odyssey, and he was talking about the living landscape, but now he's going to go and ruin it all. He's going to mention the GAS. And we might just go to the next slide. I was very fortunate that day, because just when I was about to mention the GAS, this creator came into the room and started lambasting me and shouting and roaring at me Oscailiga in a Tighe dialect.
Did research on crossroads dancing, and where was it people met in the public domain? And I suppose that's the problem area, was there's not really many public domains in the countryside. Everything's privatised, even with the GAA, especially when I went looking for permission to use a field later on. But tug of war is an upland activity, and it was at the time, and there turned out to be this pretty famous tug of war team, and 5 of them were still alive. And 5 of them told me 5 different stories coming from all different angles about this famous tug of war final that they got to. And they should have won, but somebody robbed the rope, and then they didn't win it, and they were duped and whatnot. So that's when memory became really interesting and a really malleable material, really, because neither 5 of their versions were wrong. They were all correct. They were just remembered differently. They were smudged by time. So that became really creative fuel, you could say, for expanding what memory is and this memory trace, and looking at absence. And so tug of war became this symbol for community, because you can't play tug of war alone. You had to have people on your side, but you also had to have people on the other side. So it played out this agonism, it was antagonistic, you know. I commissioned a cup, and we had an event in the last slide, and to get over 300 people in a field on the 9th of December in 2012, when there wasn't coffees and, you know, all the amenities available, it was literally a field. Not even a flat field. That was really quite interesting as well, because there was an advantage on one side and not on the other. Again, I produced a book at the end. I work with Atelier David Smith, and it became a sort of an artefact. We'd also produced these beer mats, and really they were limited edition, and they were scattered around the pubs or distributed, and people from abroad were looking for this limited edition beer mat, which gave the history of the game and the history of the old tug of war team. So when I said I was looking for a field, it's really hard to get somewhere neutral in the countryside.
So a bit of a background to the project. In 1937 and 38, Bardove National School took part in a national project initiated by the Irish Folklore Commission. And it was a project that every national school in Ireland took part in, including my own village, Bardove. So the project involves students from 5th and 6th class in Bardove National School collecting and documenting their local folklore, history, traditions, as well as the flora and fauna of Bardove village. So the information was collected in the form of handwritten transcripts of the children's research and their own actual handwritten copybooks. So the children collected the material mainly from their parents, their grandparents, and from older members of the Bardove community. So the children's copybooks and transcripts are actually held in the Department of Folklore Archives in UCD, and it will be seen as a hugely significant collection. At the same time, practically nobody in our village was aware that this collection existed, yet it contained a very rich archive of material, very specific to the area. It gave detailed information down to things like place names for fields, stories of ghosts and hidden treasures, jokes, descriptions of traditional craft making, and funny stories and events that happened to particular people in the area. So some of the children who took part in the actual project in 1938 were actually still alive and living in the village, and many of them had relatives still attending the Bardo National School at the time. So over a period of 9 months, I worked on a weekly basis with students from Bardo National School, reinvestigating the collection from 1937-38. So I worked with the students to collect and document the history, folklore, from their parents, grandparents and older members of the community in Bardo, similar to what the children had done in 1938. So students also undertook new research that documented their own lives for future generations. So this took the form of storytelling, discussions, digital sound recording, digital photography, as well as drawings, written documentation, and the collection of different materials and artifacts. So it was very exciting and dynamic experience for me working in the school, and I think it was very exciting for the students as well. They would come back every week with amazing stories from their parents and grandparents, and it really got everyone involved in the project. So it was very much intergenerational project. And I think, you know, a lot of the time the students were really surprised when they'd come back with these stories, because they just never asked their grandparents or didn't know that this information was there.
So, being privileged enough to go all over the world and perform in America, Canada, you name it, we've toured extensively. I wanted to do something for my town, and the project actually started in the form of when my brother, who suffers with mental illness, actually had suicidal tendencies. That changed my approach of what I wanted and how I went about my purpose. Because for me, it was just, I love music and I want to, you know, be the biggest musician out there. But when someone in your family is going through something like that, you kind of, you know, instead of just it being just about the rich history in Shannon, I said, no, this is something that is not only affecting my younger brother, but I believe is affecting my community in Shannon. And that goes for some of the other kids in Shannon. And what better way to do it than to engage them, as opposed to not talk at them, but to work with them. So I was able to go and do workshops with them and really get in their mind and their hearts. And for me as a creative, as a writer, you know, I needed to hear from them, from the source, and say, okay, so talk to me, what's up? You know, what's really up? And it changed also my stance on being a role model. You know, sometimes artists don't want to be, they want to be apolitical. But unfortunately, in times when people are committing suicide and people literally are fascist, you know, in our very country, actually in our towns, more often than not, because we're not in big cities where, you know, your next door neighbor knows this person's kid or whatever. So I might be the only representation of a black person that someone is going to understand or get to know personally. I have to speak out about things. So it's actually, I can't be apolitical. I have to be. So that goes for my younger brother. So if I'm going to polarize, I don't mind being a polarizing figure if my little brother survives. So that's the reason why I chose to do a song about mental health for my community, because I believe that the young people literally always know the root of the problem because they're very observant. And I learned a lot from those young people. And that's the reason why this project was such a success, is because it was something that really affected them. And you know, we need to believe in our children when they speak, because they have a lot to say that sometimes we just say, oh, you know what, sure, what do they know? Actually, they're very smart individuals. If you give them the credit and the time to just hear them out and see what they can produce. And that's how I was able to do this project called Cloud9. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The XPO itself began its life as a public art project some 13 years ago now. It was initiated by an artist called Tighe. And it's really become this unique cultural hub for the community of Kilnaboy and North Clare. So I was very, very privileged to have the opportunity to work within that community on this project. I think it's one of the great privileges, and you know, I can see it in a lot of the presentations today, that, and it's not often spoken about, but as artists, we have this great privilege of being able to enter into these worlds and experience these communities and places that we, you know, other people might never have the opportunity to. So it's an absolute privilege, and I really feel that. And I felt it through a lot of the other presentations today. So it's this is the XPO. It's run by a small group of volunteers, and they have a year-round program of talks, workshops, gigs, events. They have exhibitions. The space holds a series of archival projects that were initiated by Tighe some years ago. It supports local groups and weekly meetings, and it now has a fully functioning radio station with transmission, which is, unfortunately at the minute, it's just sitting there idle, but hopefully down the line, once some form of normality returns, that will kind of reignite into something else, and I'll talk a bit about that later on. So, who you're looking at here, so this is the studio. I'll talk a bit more about the process in a minute. So what I'll talk about today, I'll talk a little bit about the process, I'll talk a little bit about some of the projects that came out of it, and maybe a little bit about the legacy as well. But it's run by a small group of volunteers, and this is them. This is them. They don't even like to really call themselves a committee. They like to call themselves more of a gathering of people, and it can be quite fluid as well, who kind of moves in and out of that. So they're quite there's been quite a unique build-up of a creative cultural community in this place over the last 13 years. And this was kind of a perfect space for me to kind of start working with this project. Actually, Pauline mentioned in her talk there that she doesn't like to work with pre-established groups, and this is something that I was kind of thinking about, and I felt like actually this group, although, and I said it there, they're not, they don't even consider themselves a committee necessarily. I didn't feel like there was this kind of strong kind of political or kind of established sense of structured community in that place. And I think that's one of the brilliant things about the XPO and the way they run and set up the place. So folk radio was a concept for a temporary arts-led radio station. And this concept really was to utilise the medium of radio as a creative platform, working with this creative community of the XPO and all of its activities over the past decade. And the idea really was to reimagine and respond to the landscape and people of the Burren. So I think, you know, one of the amazing things about radio is that it's a uniquely democratic medium. It's kind of, it's omnipresent, it's open to all. And I think this is what really excited me about it, was this prospect or idea that folk radio could occupy a kind of an alternative listening space for this kind of cultural engagement with the landscape. So the project spanned about 18 months, and the process for me very much involved becoming part of this XPO community. So again, I talk about this kind of privilege that we have as artists. I really felt like I kind of became part of this community. I became part of that XPO family over that time. And like all socially engaged work, I think it's one of the really important aspects of it is the building of these relationships, the building of trust. And I know Gareth talked a bit about that earlier on as well, and developing these connections. And that's really essential in these projects. You know, and for me, this kind of socially engaged work, it's imperative that these things develop over time and are allowed to have an influence on the outcomes, or they're allowed to kind of shape and generate what comes out of the project.
You know, for me, I see one of the things that, you know, not engaging, and again, these are questions, and I'd love to hear people's thoughts on them afterwards. But one of the things we need to do is come up with some way of engaging with people's doubts without threatening them. You know, I know, God knows mentioned the, you know, actual fascists in our communities, the rise of, we see people, you know, grasping at kind of conspiracy theories. And to me, it seems that people are grasping for certainties, right? And that's because we're extremely uncomfortable with doubts and lack of knowledge. And it seems to me that as artists or as community workers, that one of the things we have to do at the moment is somehow come up with sharing our skills for working with doubt and uncertainty. I think that you know, in terms of our work with the rural groups, you know, we have everybody from the Movement of Asylum Seekers in Ireland, which is a grassroots, you know, pretty radical campaigning group looking for full human rights for asylum seekers in Ireland, to the under 12 scouts in our network of groups. So we have a whole wide range of opinions. But one of the things that strikes me is that when we see things, you know, around farming, if you take the significance of farming or tourism in County Clare, if you take those things, most of us accept that those things have to change, and they have to change very significantly. But we haven't painted any picture of the possibilities or the imagination or the, you know, the kind of positive futures that might come from that change. So we're asking people to step into unknowing. We're asking them to lose something and step into the unknown. And I think, you know, in some ways, some people are forced into that position. I'm thinking very much of asylum seekers. Asylum seekers are forced quite often to take a jump into the unknown. I'm thinking of, say, for example, we talk about a housing crisis in Ireland. If we want to know about a housing crisis, the traveller community have been experiencing one for 30 years, so probably they have a lot of knowledge that we could access. And so those are the things that, in the doubt or in the things that we're normally trying to fix, there are a lot of lessons. And what I'd like to do in terms of just thinking here about what are the changing communities, if we could come up collectively or as a thinking unit with the ideas of where knowledge is stored. It's like, you know, it's like the side of the ring fort where there's always sleet and hail, for example. Knowledge is stored in our communities, and that the guarding of that knowledge doesn't necessarily need to be joined to a conservative prevention of change. But one of the things, because that knowledge and those ways of life seem to have been under attack, they're defensive. And so that's something that I'd like to put forward there, is how can we work with our doubts, and how can we work, you know, how can we not, you know, I think it's positive thinking is one of the things we're always being told to be positive. If I could give a list of things that I've been told so often since I worked in Clare, someone always tells me to be positive in a meeting, as if, you know, but actually that quite often steps on people's fears. And fears don't go away if you step on them, they just go sideways and they manifest elsewhere. So in a way, how can we make those fears come out and work forward from them when none of us know where we're going? So that's the counselling session I'm here looking for today, if anyone can give me an answer.
Certainly with the Gaining Ground project, and most of the projects we have done, a huge amount of work goes into developing the briefs in the first place. And that is often where a lot of the discussion and debate happens, to get people onto that page before it ever goes out as a call to the artists. And that can be very time consuming. It can be quite intense, because that is where a lot of the consultation would take place. And oftentimes when we talk about consulting around public art, that consultation may not be official, but it may be information or queries that are coming in, or other programs within a local authority context that are happening, that are all feeding into the zeitgeist of what's happening in North Clare at the moment, or what's happening in Shannon, and all that general information would feed into the development of a brief, rather than it just being, let's do something in Shannon. So it can be quite complex as such. So there's certainly different stages in the process, and the artist comes in at the brief stage as such. But there's
a lot of work went into get there. Okay. We're looking into creative approaches to commissioning public art projects. And we started off by inviting Mary McAuliffe up to speak. Mary's arts advisor and cultural planning specialist. She's over 25 years experience in the public sector and was recently appointed Arts Council's Public Art Policy Advisor. Mary McAuliffe, thanks.
Hi everyone. We're nearing the end of the day, and in many respects, today for me at any rate, and I'm sure for many of you, has been a journey through creative approaches to commissioning public art. It's been a truly wonderful day. The richness of the work that's been created, from Lisa's great evocation around Lixnaw, where my father was from, you know, and all of the wonderful discoveries you made, and you know, the affirmation of our need to connect with one another, and Sean's piece about the ring forts and the fairy forts, and just reminding us of the knowledge the land holds, the mystery and the magic, you know, contrasting that with the rationalism sometimes of today's world, the globalization, the placelessness, the anywhereville that so much of contemporary design and planning can create. And in this piece, I suppose, to conclude, it's an apt one actually to finish, because in many ways what it does is it summarises what the day has been about and what many of you have expressed during the day. And I think that, you know, if ever there was a justification, going back to Siobhan's introduction, about the decision by Clare County Council to pull the funding and to go with this programmatic approach, I think for me at any rate, the value of that approach and the justification for it in terms of what's been shared here today is beyond doubt. And I think that, you know, the ecology of public art and public commissioning, it is an ecology, and ecologies and ecosystems thrive on diversity. And what we need are lots of different diverse approaches. And Sally and I were talking at lunchtime, and we both were in agreement that really the most creative approach to commissioning is where the commissioner creates the conditions for an artist to thrive and for an artist to respond in a manner that they can flourish.